Thank you for your patience, everybody. I lost internet connection there, so it kicked me off for some reason. Do we have everybody on? We've got Deputy Mayor, we've got Jameson, Oki, maybe Fodey, and Councillor Gorrell. But he doesn't want to show his face, I guess. Oh, there he is. Now I can see him. And we have our presenters from Dillon and Watson and Associates. Okay. So I think the clerk is going to bring me the motions, and then we'll move from there. Should have wore flat shoes. Okay. So once the clerk gets back into the room. Okay, so the clerk's back into the room. Madam Clerk, do we have staff in the room that obviously I can't see them? So you have the staff that we require?
I have no audio.
You have no audio, you can't hear? Okay, so Brian doesn't have any audio. So we can hear him, so his thing is, he's not muted. He can't hear us, so I would assume that he just needs to put the volume up on his.
Maybe the volume on your own computer.
Okay, hang on 2 seconds. So we have a staff member assisting Mr. Maybe. So can you nod, Brian, for us? We can hear, okay. So everybody's on and everybody can hear, and now I've lost Deputy Mayor Lackey. It's like herding cats. Oh, here he is, there he's back. We're good. Okay. So he just needed his little hearing assistance. Okay, so it's 6:32, so I will call the meeting to order at this point in time, just to get the meeting moving. Any declaration of interest or general nature thereof, please state it now by raising your hand to let me know you have a declaration. Any declarations? Seeing none, we'll move forward with delegations and presentations. So first on the docket is Dillon Consulting in regards to the Rockport strategic plans. So we'll allow the consultants from Dillon to speak. I'm not sure if it's Monica or Eric who's going to go first. Monica, wonderful.
Hi there. Are you able to see my presentation?
We can see it. I believe there, we can see it now. Can you see it on your screen as well?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we'll get rolling. I'm here to present the Rockport Strategic Plan Update and Community Transportation Strategy. I know that we don't have a ton of time allotted for the presentation, so I'll run through things relatively quickly, but would be happy to return to any of the slides as needed. I'll start with a reintroduction of our project team, go over the project process, provide an overview of the plan, and then I believe there are some questions that are directed towards us as well. So my name is Monica Beliveau. I am a planner and urban designer based out of Dillon Consulting's Ottawa office. I was also the project manager for this work. And with me on the line as well is Eric Stewart, who is the transportation lead. Dillon was retained to update the 2005 strategic plan and to develop a community transportation strategy, or CTS. The study area for the work is outlined in that darker black outline on the left image. The work was originally divided into 4 phases, which started with reviewing the current conditions and some early consultation. We developed and refined a preferred concept. An additional phase was added, or 2.5, which served to prepare a new concept based on the abundance of feedback that we received. And then this was again refined into the strategic plan and CTS, and it was drafted and comments collected on that as well. For an overview of the plan, the purpose was to establish a vision and strategy for future land use and development in Rockport. This included developing short and long-term options and recommendations with regard to right-of-way configuration, traffic congestion relief, and particularly along Front Street for the safe use by buses, passenger vehicles, trucks, boat trailers, pedestrians, and cyclists. And the image is on the right there of the older plan. We had a number of consultation events throughout the process. This included focus group meetings in person in October of 2019, as well as a public information center in October and December of 2019, and March 12th, 2020, right before the world changed on us. We had some virtual focus group meetings afterward. Those occurred in May, and the draft was released online for review and to receive comments from October to November of this year. According to the input that we received from stakeholders and members of the public, the primary challenge with Rockport is the increased traffic volume on Front Street during the tourist season, typically from mid-spring to mid-fall. The capacity of Front Street is a challenge when there's increased volume of private vehicles entering the village core. So private vehicles are entering for many reasons, which include vehicle trailers trailing their boats to the public boat ramp to load them into the water, coach buses that enter the village core to allow their tour passengers to embark or disembark from the private owned parking lot, and those seeking public parking for more direct access to the local businesses, and also people who just take a leisurely drive out to the scenic area. During business operating hours in tourist season, there's a large group of pedestrians, and they're often in the village core, occupying the public right-of-way, which includes the paved traveled surface. So this impacts vehicular mobility and encroaches onto private property as well. These challenges are particularly prevalent in the boat launch area and near the bus parking lot. Specific challenges and recommendations are highlighted using the following subsections that it will review. So these are the public boat ramp, parking, delineation of the public and private space, pedestrian safety, and additional recommendations. I did also include this slide from some of our earlier consultation sessions, which highlights the fact that Ontario municipalities, big and small, have limited ability to control an existing development that may be contributing to an issue. Further, it is understood that recommendations included in the 2005 strategy were not undertaken. So in developing this updated plan and strategy, there was a particular focus on recommendations which were actionable and would result in some improvement on the ground. With regard to the public boat ramp, the recommendations seek to recommend improving the boat ramp itself, which has been degraded over time, to separate the boat launch area traffic and tour buses, to create a queue east of the boat launch to allow for easier access, new signage for queuing, delineation of the narrow public right-of-way from private property using pavement markings and curbing, and consider acquiring land for a second or alternative public boat ramp, which would be able to accommodate larger craft. Here are some images from the plan that depict some of those things I mentioned. So the queuing area and the location of the boat ramp itself with that narrow right-of-way. With regard to parking, we're recommending that a parking lot be developed north of the parkway for use by the public, to close the existing bus slot access point with barrier curbing. So right now it's quite open, so there's a traffic is able to move quite freely. A single entry and exit point on the western frontage onto Front Street for bus parking, which would be away from the boat launch, and to consider the development of an alternative coach bus parking area outside of the village core. Additionally, on-street parking spaces are preserved through the concept, and we're recommending considering placing barrier-free spaces near customs dock if that is something that you'd like to pursue, as well as single entry and exit point for boat line customers, which would reduce travel distance along Front Street. Again, here are some images. So the public parking lot along the Thousand Islands Parkway on the north side, as well as the curbing and right-of-way delineation along the most active area of Front Street. And again, the existing and the proposed on-street parking areas. So the rearrangement of on-street parking in the area, there's currently 9 spaces, and then the rearrangement, there would be 9 or 10. And here's the existing and proposed access points for the private parking area for the boat line. With regard to delineating public and private space, we're recommending that landscaping be used to physically and visually delineate the public sidewalk from the private bus parking lot to help pedestrians understand where they should and should not be walking. This involves the extension of the existing sidewalk, some space for public use at the customs dock. Consider signage if trespassing issues continue to persist, which were a noted issue. We're also recommending that tour operators communicate the areas that are and are not publicly accessible, and the hiring of part-time staff to direct vehicle and pedestrian traffic to help all of these measures to work together. And again, some of those detailed areas. With regard to pedestrian and cyclist safety, we've recommended that a signalized crosswalk be added on the parkway at Front Street and Escott Rockport Road. Also to consider an additional signalized crosswalk at Birches Lane, as well as to reduce the speed limit on the parkway in the vicinity of Rockport. 5 speed cushions are added on Front Street, as well as 3 pedestrian crossings added in the concept. Like I mentioned, the extension of the existing sidewalk to provide direction for where people can walk safely. Low-level fencing would help to preserve the heritage feel and also help to prevent pedestrians from wandering into the street. We've also recommended moving the boat queuing area, as I mentioned, which allows pedestrians and cyclists to stay on the shoulder of the road, and again, to hire part-time staff. Here is a depiction of the crossing areas and a suggested materiality that could be used for the crossings near the boat ramp to help signal to drivers to slow down as well. Here's an image of what these speed cushions look like, as well as the placement that is recommended throughout the area. And here's a depiction of how all this comes together. So there's many components that work together to improve those issues that we mentioned at the start. There are additional recommendations that are included in the plan as well, which include a monitoring plan, which would support the implementation of the strategic plan and CTS. We've also identified a couple potential amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw, which would help to prevent existing issues from being exacerbated. These include requirements for transportation impact studies where needed, and to consider requiring cost-benefit feasibility study for packaged sewer treatment if the area is intended to densify into the future. Many of these recommendations are short-term. They are also among the easiest to implement and are typically low cost. So these are the low-hanging fruit that are expected to provide improvements relatively quickly. Those components that cannot be easily or quickly undertaken are assigned over a longer period of time. So in this slide, these just include the public boat ramp that is a secondary option, as well as a coach bus parking lot that's outside of the village core. And on the second slide includes the determination of the future density of this area and whether the feasibility study for a packaged sewer treatment plant would be worthwhile. So in conclusion, the updated strategic plan and CTS is intended to provide a strategy for future land use and development in Rockport that will work towards achieving a vision for its future. The vision, which emerged through public consultation, is to create an enhanced public realm that maintains and enhances the village's relationships to the water and its peaceful historic character. The short and long-term recommendations described offer a land use concept and mobility strategy to address the ongoing issues and work towards achieving that vision. While the strategic plan and CTS are intended to guide the strategic steps to being undertaken by the township, success will ultimately depend on ongoing communication and cooperation with the Rockport community and local business operators as well. And I'd be happy to take any questions or comments now, or I'm not sure if we're waiting till after.
Madam Clerk, can I see the full view so that I can identify individuals to speak if they raise their hands? Because right now I only have 4. I think it's because we're sharing the screen. Perfect. Now I can see everybody. Are there any questions or comments in regards to the presenter tonight? Councillor Jameson, I can't really see your face. Nothing for you? Okay, I've got Councillor Fodey and I got Councillor maybe. So Councillor Fodey, go first, and then Councillor Gorrell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, are we discussing any feedback you've had since the public opening of this presentation from October till November?
Monica, would you like to speak to, or maybe Madam Planner? I'm not sure if you want to. I can't see the planner, so I don't know where she is on this. Does this planner want to speak to it? Yes. Okay, I'll let the planner answer that question, Councillor Fodey. So is she coming to the podium? I can't hear you, Madam Clerk.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. The plan was posted online from October 16th to November 16th. Emails were sent out to all members of the public that left email addresses and attended the previous public sessions. I believe it was 84 attendants that the emails were sent out to. There were a number of comments received in response to the last version of the plan that's in front of council this evening. In addition, all of the pieces of public correspondence were circulated and provided to council. A lot of the comments were around parking at the customs dock and the number of barrier-free spaces that are recommended to be provided. In addition, there were comments provided by the boat line with respect to the implementation and some of the recommendations in the report. As well, there were some concerns regarding the realignment and location of the bus entrance to the parking lot with the curbing of that area. One thing I would like to note is that with the recommendations for official plan and zoning amendments, those amendments themselves would be subject to further public process and comment before council. So any amendments that are brought forward to implement this study will be subject to further public input and public consultation. So while the study's in front of council for a recommendation, I'd like to point out that this isn't the end of a process. This is the beginning of a new process for implementation. So there will be continued engagement with the community going forward.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Fodey? Yep. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one follow-up. With regards to the speed bumps there, Monica, was that relevant to the initial studies that there was a speed issue on the east side of the village? I'm just wondering, like, the core of the whole problem centers around the boat ramp issue. I'm just wondering if the residents want or are receptive of speed bumps on the eastern part of the village. But we can implement these. I know we can implement, sorry, Your Worship, I know we can implement these as we wish, but I was just curious as to the speed bumps on the east side.
Go ahead, Monica.
Certainly. Yes, we did receive comments that speeding was an issue throughout the whole area. So it was something that we looked at on both ends, and I believe we received comments as well to increase them on the east side, if I'm not incorrect. Eric might correct me. So yes, it was something that we had heard that could be improved across all of Front Street.
Okay, thank you. Just as a comment, I like what you've summarized here. As you alluded to, the implementation of a lot of this is rather minor in cost as far as implementation. It'll remain to be seen what is implemented and in what order, but I want to thank you for drawing this all together. Thank you.
I will recognize Councillor Maybe, then Councillor Gorrell, and then Deputy Mayor Lackey.
And thank you, Your Worship, through you. So by looks of the study, it still could has the two-way traffic throughout, because I know that was one of the major issues that had been brought up in the earlier time frame. And the other question that I have is, the businesses that are all down there, by what I've read, look like they're pretty invested in making these changes to improve the village and try to mitigate any more issues. As much as, not everything's perfect, as we know, but certainly this goes a long way to addressing most of the issues that which I've heard while I've been sitting in this seat. So thank you for your diligence in doing the work, and we'll see what we can get done.
I'll recognize Councillor Gorrell.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Under Monica, I guess, and probably through planning, under limitations where it says we cannot. Monica, when you were looking at this study, when you use the word parking, are you talking the paved current parking lot, or are you also taking into consideration the gravel grassed areas that are used for non-bus parking? And the reason I'm asking is, under site plan control and under our holding considerations for the property, which was negotiated, it's ambiguous to me when we are talking about what we can and cannot do under site plan control. So is it just the currently paved parking that you're referring to? Thanks. And I have a follow-up question regarding the crosswalk near the boat ramp, 5A and B or 5B. Thank you.
Go ahead, Monica.
Thank you. With regard to your first question, so we did look at parking as a whole, so including the area, I believe you're referring to the area that's north of the paved bus parking lot that's in the treed area.
Yes.
Yes, so we did look at that as well, with the acknowledgement that at the time when this study began, we were making recommendations that there wasn't a mechanism to require that they be done, and trying to find something that is a compromise and improves the area that the private property owners would be interested in doing in terms of improving the perception and the flow of the traffic in the area as well. With the site plan control and holding of the area, obviously there's a bit more ability to have a specific say in how that moves forward. I don't have as many of the details as the planner does, but yes, so there is greater control at this point, whereas at the beginning of the study, we were dealing with a development that was already underway and there wasn't a mechanism to enforce that.
Okay, thank you.
Now your second question, Councillor Gorrell, was in regards to the crosswalks.
Yes, thank you. I'm just bringing up my next slide here. I think it's labeled as 5B. Yes. Okay, so on the crosswalks down near the boat ramp, we've got 5B. It strikes me as odd. I take it that you wanted two crossings, one going each direction from the sidewalk area. The situation I see there is very odd because one of those crosswalks would take people directly at the boat ramp, which I thought would be one of the reasons we would want better control of the pedestrian traffic away from that area. So I found it very strange that we would put a crosswalk right there. I appreciate that the boat line has two areas, at least I believe I'm right in saying they have two areas that they want to funnel people toward. One would be on the east side of the boat ramp for that launching area, and the other would be the newly approved, yet to be built dock, which would be in front of the restaurant area. So I'm not sure that this plan, just a modification of it, the crosswalk, I'm not sure that it lends itself to lining people up on the eastern operation. It still puts them in the shade underneath the tree at the crosswalk, at the boat ramp. Any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So we did originally, or in one of the concepts, have a single crosswalk in that area and received a lot of feedback that people would cross there one way or another because they're seeing the line of sight is that the area they want to get to is a short crossing distance across the road. So the second crosswalk was added with the additional concept that there is going to be a staff attendant that will be monitoring the crossing and stopping and letting people cross as needed. That was identified as a key to the implementation of the successful pedestrian movement in that area. Eric, is there anything you wanted to add that's more specific to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Pedestrians tend to go where they want to go. And if there's not a cross, they'll cross to the Island View restaurant from the parking lot with or without a crosswalk. So we might as well try and delineate the space so we can guide them. And also, as Monica mentioned, the intention was to have a student there during the summer to help guide and control the pedestrian crossings.
I think, and I'm just clarifying, Councillor Gorrell, that the issue that you were looking at on the picture, it actually looks like that crosswalk goes right into the boat ramp. Is that correct, Councillor Gorrell, in what you were trying to say? I think it's a matter of the scale and us seeing, because you can't really see. I'm looking at page 26 of the package. Sorry, I've got a computer behind me, which is why I'm looking over my shoulder, that shows 5A and 5B, but 5B is the one that you're talking about, correct, Councillor Gorrell?
Yes, that's correct. And I guess I could wrap this up. I don't want to get into the weeds too far. I just found it curious. But the other comment or question would be, how much flexibility is in this thing if it was decided that, oh, that is an inappropriate place to put that? Does this plan, it's just a strategic plan, does it allow the township to say, no, it's better over there, better somewhere else rather? How's that? Is that possible? This is just a plan after all. Am I correct in assuming that?
Through your worship, it's the planner. I'm going to take that one.
Yep.
Sorry. Can't see you.
That's okay.
So yes, this is a strategic plan. This is conceptual at this point. Obviously, through implementation, as I mentioned, we're going to have to go out and ground truth these. There's going to be other community engagement in terms of where these things line up or how that works, because we're going to need to work with some of the private landowners and some of these things going forward as well. So yes, these are shown conceptually, and you were correct in stating that there's the two areas that the boat line actually onboard people into. So the intent was to direct them to each of those loading areas.
Councillor Lackey, or Deputy Mayor Lackey, you were next. You had a comment? I need you to unmute, please.
Thank
Perfect.
you. On page 15, and in the drawings, we're showing some parking area on the north side of the parkway. At one point in my life, there was a concept where the road came right straight down in front of the Rockport Hall. And so we didn't have that horrible intersection that's blind. I wondered if that was looked at so that we could separate that parking. Parking would still be in the same area, but the road would be realigned coming down Escott Rockport Road. And the other point I had was we've had a lot of complaints about people parking RVs and things at the east end near where the mailboxes are. Well, Brock would know, right in front of Barb Huck's. So I wondered if that was something that we could barricade. I know we have some signage there, we have some mailbox there, but we do have an awful lot of people that use that on a weekend basis for their camping.
I might leave this one to the planner if she wanted to make any comments in regards to the parking lot north of the Parkway.
Sure. Thank you, through your worship. So there was money in the budget, I believe, approved previously for the design of a parking area north of the Parkway. We have advanced that project and it needs to be looked at together with the implementation of the Rockport strategic plan, because everything's linked in terms of that parking area, the improvements to the right of way within Rockport, as well as the boat ramp. Everything's linked there. So there will be additional information being brought forward to council regarding that design once staff have had the opportunity to review it in greater detail and sees how it fits within the implementation of some of the recommendations for Rockport. With respect to parking at the east end, that's something I'm not aware of and haven't heard any of those concerns previously. So I'm happy to hear more about that, and we can certainly look into that when it occurs in the next season and see what enforcement mechanisms are available to us.
Any further questions before I take questions from the public? Seeing none, I'll move to, we have one hand up. I believe Ms. Merkley, you're on the line. And if Madam Clerk, if you want to allow her into the meeting to speak. Wendy, you just need to take your mute off. There we go. Go ahead.
Hi, I've been sending questions to the clerk as per the instructions, so I haven't kept them all. My first one is, are there any restrictions to the number of access driveway points that a property can have? So I have a parking lot across from our place and we have basically 2 access points. And then on the boat line, the whole thing is open and access. So is there a provision of any kind in the current bylaws that limits or doesn't limit the number of access points that any one business can have to the main thoroughfare?
Madam Planner?
Through your worship, that's a complicated question because there's existing non-conforming rights that may be in place that would predate the bylaw. So I'm going to give you a maybe on that in terms of, yes, there are zoning provisions that do look at driveways and limit driveways, but you also have to look at the history of the property and what's been occurring. With respect to the boat line parking lot, I would note that the recommendations in the report are to reinstate our right-of-way through curbing and some type of physical barrier so that the right-of-way for the township is defined and the access points are limited to that parking lot area.
I guess my question was, is that possible or is it grandfathered because it's all open?
Through your worship, that is possible.
Okay. I have another question.
Go ahead.
On the same page, it says, that hire the part-time person. Were you thinking of that as a township employee being a part-time person at the boat ramp, or a part-time person for the businesses to hire?
Madam Planner, do you want to speak to that rather than the consultants?
Through your worship, I believe the recommendation does speak to possibly having a township summer employee down there to assist with directing the public. But that is, again, I know the boat line also has summer staff that do work at that. So that's something where the township would need to coordinate with the boat lines to understand what the best way to try to address that situation may be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Wendy?
Yeah, I have a couple more.
Okay.
There was reference to developing public access at the customs park. And I was surprised at that, considering that's what we're already doing. How does that affect force and what we currently have planned?
Monica, do you want to speak to the customs dock?
Certainly. Yeah, so the recommendations surrounding the customs docks weren't to change any of the plans. It was in recognition that a lot of community effort has already gone into moving that forward as a publicly accessible space, and that there has been visioning exercises already completed outside of this work to envision a future for that as a public space as well. So this strategic plan just included that as a nod to that work that has already been completed and in support of that ongoing.
Okay, great, thank you.
Wendy, were you speaking specifically about the parking? I just want a further clarification for my own.
No, I wasn't speaking about the parking so much as the statement said develop the customs dock as public access. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant, given that that's what we've been doing. So I didn't know if there was another thought behind that. And on one place it says, some requirement will be dictated by other governing bodies. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant. It's right at the first under limitations, where it says we cannot. It's on that page, which I don't know what page number it is.
Is that in pertaining to federal or provincial governing, if they had right of way or that sort of thing, or expropriation?
Yes, that's what that would respond to. I would note that Ms. Merkley also sent another question through to the clerk in terms of restrictions, questioning can't restrict the number of tour boats. And I thought there was an offer, or that the township had restricted this. Just for clarification, the township did, through the zoning amendment that the boat line did last year, put a limit on the number of passengers based on the occupancy of the boats, based on information that the tour company has provided. So the scale of that operation as it exists based on that zoning application, the township did include a maximum occupancy in the zoning. So that zoning runs with the property. So should a different tour operator at some point acquire that property, the same restriction would apply.
Okay. My only other comment is thank you so much. I think it's a good plan. I appreciate all the consultation that was done, and I know many people in Rockport do. And I just want to say thank you, good job, and I look forward to working with you to help move some of these things forward.
I will now recognize Mr. Faubert. He's on the line. So he's been added to the speakers, and we'll just unmute him so that he can ask his question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't sure if it was, can you hear me okay? I
certainly can. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if it was appropriate at this point to make comments, or do you just want questions?
I think you can make a comment. I think it's important that, you know, I know that you were involved in this study at great length, but having added clarification on your end probably wouldn't hurt the council either.
Okay, thank you. I won't be long. First of all, just want to register our solid support for the recommendations in the final draft of the strategic plan. I do also want to thank Monica and Eric and Marnie, who did, I think, a commendable job in pulling together a lot of information with good solid data to support the recommendations that they have. While not everybody's wishes may have been met by the strategy, I think it moves the village in a very positive step forward into the future for the vision that the township has for the village. As I indicated, we support virtually all of the recommendations in the report. I have only a couple of few suggested changes that I'd like to just put on the record. Recommendation 2, which is on page 46, if you want to reference it, deals with the delineation of the boat ramp. The recommendation is to delineate the right-of-way to clarify the private and the public spaces, which we agree with entirely. The suggestion is to use pavement markings to do that. It's our concern that historically the use of those pavement markings have not really been that effective in achieving that objective. We would recommend the use of curbing or solid barrier fencing to delineate that property line. Otherwise, the existing situation of overlapping private and public property is still going to occur. So we leave that for your consideration, Madam Mayor. On page 51, talking about the opportunity to preserve on-street parking spaces, we agreed with the relocation of the single access for the buses. We think that makes a lot of sense and will help to alleviate the congestion at that corner. 3 spaces that will replace the existing access point where the buses currently go in are highly used by delivery vehicles. And we would suggest, Madam Chair and members of council, that those parking spaces be designated for use of delivery and service vehicles to serve the businesses in the village as they currently do. Again, we fully support, and I'm looking at page 55, the delineating public and private space opportunity. We agree entirely with the recommendations to use physical barriers and beautification measures, planters and landscaping and benches, etc., to delineate the spaces. We think that whatever happens in the next phase should fit with the historic character of the village in terms of that, those types of soft landscaping features. And we would be very happy to work with the township on that phase. With respect to the waterfront customs dock parquet, which is at page 56, again, we agree with the recommendations to add some removable pedestrian amenities. We are in particularly happy to see garbage facilities as one in the list because I think that's important. That has been an issue from our perspective. We also would recommend some washroom facilities if that's possible, and perhaps a portable washroom facility at that location. There are no public washrooms. They use the private washrooms now, either in the restaurants or our larger public washroom. So we would recommend as part of that improvement that consideration be given to some portable washrooms. And finally, the additional recommendations which deal with the cost benefit and feasibility study for packaged sewer treatment facility, and the other one for a transportation impact study. We don't have a problem with that. We want to, and I realize that it'll be an official plan amendment that will implement those, and we'll be part of that process of preparing it. But we want to make sure that those particular studies are for fairly extensive changes to implement the densification of the area, and that they don't become requirements for minor additions, accessory buildings, that sort of thing. We think that that's an important clarification that we will be seeking in the official plan. Other than that, Madam Chair, once again, I thank the consultants and staff in the township for what we think is a very good plan, and the owners of Rockport are committed to working with you to implement these in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faubert. I will just add my last comments and then we'll move on from this presentation. I too would like to thank the consultants, both Monica and Eric, for their hard work along with our planner. I know that when we first embarked on this was a very touchy issue for a number of people, but I am pleased that there was so much public participation, good, bad, or otherwise, and the comment that Mr. Faubert made in regards to, you know, maybe not everybody, and I believe Ms. Merkley said the same thing, that maybe not everybody got exactly what they wanted, but there was a lot of compromises made, and I think it's a good plan, and some things that we can do fairly quickly or within the next couple of years. That'll be up to the council to make those decisions, but we appreciate all the effort and time put in both by the consultants and the public who've taken time out of their days and to make sure that the future of Rockport is one that everyone can live with. So thank you very much to everyone. So with that, we'll move on to the next consultant. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Eric, and have a good evening. The next presentation delegation is Watson and Associates in regards to the wastewater study.
Corey, there was one more member of the public that had.
Okay, I apologize, Mr. Stewart. I'll just take this last question, Ms. Sturkin. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Here, right there.
There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
We can.
I have a couple of comments. It relates mainly to the fact that the study appears to focus on public transportation or the problems that exist on public land. I think a very important component that should have been considered and needs to be considered in order to avoid liability because of failure to act on keeping pedestrians safe and that sort of thing is the management of the parking lot itself. And I have a few suggestions to make. Okay. In order, you know, one of the main things that attracts pedestrians to the road, to Front Street, is the fact that the parking lot for the cars have an entrance and an exit at the top, and people tend to walk out that way onto the road, and there are no sidewalks, so they're walking on the road. That's the way they go. The pedestrians could be directed to walk along the old right-of-way by the toilets to the east side of the parking lot, where there is lots of room. There's grass there, there are cars, staff cars, I guess, parked there, okay? The other thing that attracts pedestrians is that they tend to, in my opinion, the ticket office is in completely the wrong place. So pedestrians, all pedestrians, both passengers, should be directed to the east side of the paved parking lot to do their business, to keep them away from Front Street and to keep them away from the boat ramp, okay? Then they can cross the street near the dock, the customs dock, to go across to the south side of Front Street. That way they would avoid conflict with buses and with the boat ramps. There is space there for a sidewalk on the property of the boat line, okay? The second suggestion I have is that while the entrance should be on the north side of that parking lot, the exit will be tricky because the hill there, you cannot see the traffic coming from the parkway, okay? Maybe you can if you're a bus driver because you're higher, but certainly in a car you can't. And I would suggest that the exit should be further to the south side. The buses to exit the parking lot further to the south side. Maybe, you know, either where the ticket office is now or just south of the ticket office. The buses should enter in the north side and continue to the east side of the parking lot, and there should be bus aisles like in any bus station where buses unload. You know, that would keep buses from having to back up, which is very noisy and disruptive and polluting, and also very dangerous given all the pedestrians that are wandering around. So that if you have aisles, say at a 30-degree angle or whatever is a convenient angle for the buses to pull around and pull into, the passengers can disembark, go to the east side of the parking lot, and then proceed to the boat line. That would keep them all away from Front Street until they're way on the south side where the congestion is not nearly as acute as it is on the west side, okay? The buses, the other reason why I think the buses should pull out further south is that if they pull out on the north side, they will be revving like crazy past the few houses that are there because they have to go up that hill. You know, they pick up speed and, you know, they're going to have to floor it to pick up speed and make it up that hill. Whereas they start further south, it is much more gradual and therefore they would not have to rev as much and consequently make as much noise or pollute as much, okay?
In front of houses.
So my suggestion is, I know you don't have the power to do it, but the boat line professes to have the interest of the community at hand, is that the ticket office is in the wrong place, okay? It should be moved. There is lots of room on the east side of the paved parking lot, both to direct the pedestrians coming out of the car parking lot and out of the buses. Then you direct them across the street to the boat line, right near where the customs dock is, and then they proceed west towards wherever they embark on the boat, okay? And the same thing on the way back. That way you keep all the pedestrians away from Front Street, except when they cross, okay? And this is a passenger management issue, okay? And clearly the boat line has a responsibility to help in implementing that kind of management. Bus aisles are used in every bus station. This space, this parking lot is overused with a number of buses. So they need to manage it properly. Given the zoning agreement that you have with them, where they limited, I think, to 400 passengers at any one time. I think that was the number, and Marnie can probably tell us. That should mean that they don't need more than 12 buses there anytime at any one time. Okay, and then the other buses can, I don't know what they will do with the overlight. They may have phone contact, radio contact. They need to manage it, because let's face it, most of the congestion is basically because of the boat line's success. If they want to have continued success, they have to meet their responsibilities in terms of managing the consequences of their success. Okay.
Do you have any further comments? Your comments have all been noted, Mr. Sturkin. Is there anything further?
Not really, other than no stopping on Front Street for buses. Okay. That's definitely and somebody made a comment about Birches Lane and the speed bumps. Birches Lane has gotten probably twice as busy as it was when the traffic study was done, ever since Huck's started doing all their servicing and sales on the Parkway. So the traffic, between Huck and the Parkway is constant now. Okay. And it's probably at least as busy as the other side. So if you're talking about lights, which I don't think you'll get, traffic lights, Birches Lane will probably need it as much now as the other side, as Front Street. So, other than that, I think,
Okay. I appreciate your input. Thank you so much, Mr. Sturgeon. Madam Clerk, is there any other comments or I don't see any here. I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anybody. I apologize. So we'll move on to the next presentation, Watson and Associates Water Wastewater Study. Thank you very much.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen here before we get going. If I could just get confirmation that everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
I see some nodding heads. Perfect. Thank you. And I'll just do one more thing here. Grab my virtual laser pointer and we can get going. Excellent. So thank you for having me. I'm Peter Simcisco with Watson and Associates. The township retained Watson and Associates to undertake a water and wastewater rate study, as well as a water financial plan. I think it's been just about 5 years since the township last undertook a comprehensive rate study Typically, municipalities do undertake these with a 5-year cycle. And as well, there's the requirement for the township to prepare the water financial plan, which is a requirement for renewing its drinking water system license. So that's one of the drivers behind undertaking this exercise at this point in time. The projections that have been developed and that underlie the rate study this time are based on a customer profile and a growth forecast that's consistent with historical rates of development that have been seen. There's a capital plan as well that has been prepared, which is consistent with information provided by Aqua, which operates the township's water and wastewater systems. And then finally, on the operating side, we have the 2020 operating budget, which was used as a baseline for developing these projections as well. So those are all items that I'll unpack a little bit further as we proceed through the presentation this evening. So in terms of the existing rates, I would like to note firstly that the water and wastewater systems are financially self-sustaining through user fees, meaning there is no funding provided for these services from the general tax levy. And for both water and wastewater, the township uses a rate structure that comprises two main elements. So firstly, as you see at the top, in the top portion of these two tables on the slide, there's a monthly base charge, which varies with meter size. And that monthly base charge includes up to 20 cubic meters of water consumption that's included within that. And then the second major element of the rate structure is a volume charge that's applied to metered water consumption exceeding that 20 cubic meters threshold in a month. And that volume charge also does vary with meter size, with a higher charge per cubic meter applied to customers that have a meter that's more than 2 inches in size. Something to note here at this point is that this amount of consumption that's included within the base charge of 20 cubic meters per month basically means that a customer can consume 240 cubic meters over the course of a year and only be charged the monthly base charges. And this is something that I'll come back to later on in the presentation. So then before I get into the analysis and the findings, I would like to provide a high-level overview of the methodology that is employed when undertaking a rate study. So firstly, starting with the top left of the illustration, we have the growth forecast, and that's the growth forecast in terms of the number of new customers that may connect to these systems in future years as a result of development in the township. The growth forecast informs how many customers and then how much water consumption the total costs of these systems will be shared amongst. Now, with that additional growth, there may be the need for additional infrastructure upgrades or in some cases expansion. And so the growth forecast itself to some extent informs the capital works requirements to some extent. The township does not currently impose development charges on new development. However, based on a recent report, we do know that on the wastewater side of things, there may be a need to expand the lagoon system to support anticipated development over the 2038 planning horizon. And so this is an area where the township may wish to consider using development charges to fund that expansion in the future. So then in addition to the growth and the growth related needs, we have other capital needs that may arise from potentially legislative changes that may require updates to treatment or monitoring processes. We may have items that need to address localized issues with infrastructure, as well as general asset management planning. And so once we have an understanding of those capital works requirements, those are then translated into a 10-year capital budget forecast. And then relative to that capital budget forecast, we are looking at financing options such as development charges, where those may apply for the growth related components of capital items, utilizing debt to mitigate large rate spikes, or financing bigger expenditures over a longer term, as well as any external senior level government grant funding that may be available to address some of those needs, and also utilizing reserves and reserve funds. Now, as a result of those financing decisions that may be made relative to that capital forecast, there may be some capital related expenditures such as debt servicing costs in some cases, which then flow through to the operating budget forecast as those debt repayments need to start to be made. In addition to those capital and capital related expenditures, we also have then the operating forecast, which includes things like salary costs and external contract costs, utility costs, materials and supplies, and so on. And then finally, because the capital needs tend to be, I'll say, lumpy in the sense that there may be years with a few bigger projects and then a number of years with relatively low capital investment needs, we utilize capital reserves and reserve funds as a stabilizing mechanism, building relatively constant annual contributions to those reserve funds from the operating budget on an annual basis, and then drawing down on those reserves or drawing down those reserves as needed to pay for capital needs in any particular year. So once we bring those capital and operating elements together with the consumption user forecast, we can calculate the rates that would be required to support that overall funding level that's required. Now, before I proceed, I'll just touch on the growth forecast. Currently, there are approximately 300, just over 300 customers using the township's water and wastewater systems. And based on the historical levels of development that have been seen over recent years, we're projecting approximately 14 additional customers to connect to these systems over the next 10 years. So that was the overall methodology. And with that said, on the next slide here, we have a summary of the infrastructure assets that enable the township to provide water and wastewater services. And as we can see, between water and wastewater, the combined value of these assets, including the facilities and the pipes that are in the ground, the water tower and the lagoon system, that replacement value based on current estimates is about $19.7 billion. Now, relative to that asset inventory, we have estimated the average annual life cycle needs, which are based on the life expectancies of the different assets and the components and their respective replacement costs. And based on these fairly high level estimates, there's approximately $511,000 in annual capital funding capacity that should be included in the rate structure design to ensure the sustainable management of these important assets and the township's ability to continue providing safe and reliable water and wastewater services. So this amount I'll come back to shortly. So here on slide 5, we are looking at the capital needs that have been identified for the next 4 years and 2020 and these are presented in uninflated, so current dollars. And as an annual average over that time frame, the capital expenditures for water and wastewater services combined are expected to average just under $37,000 annually. And that average is represented by the lower horizontal line or the teal line. Now, the purple horizontal line, which is across the top of the illustration here, indicates the long run average annual life cycle costs associated with the township's water and wastewater assets. And this is approximately $511,000 as we saw on the previous slide. Now, the fact that this top purple line is above the average annual needs identified for the next 4 years indicates that there will be further pressure to renew and replace infrastructure over the longer term. So beyond those specific needs that have been identified at this time for the next 4 years, we want to recognize that there's this longer term average annual life cycle need that's related to the assets that are supporting these services. And so when we're setting rates, it is important to consider that longer term outlook and then to understand whether the average capital spending over the short term or over the next number of years is aligned with that longer term average or whether it is higher or lower. And then again, to ensure long-term sustainability, rates should be designed to accommodate capital funding at levels that are consistent with that long-run average. So that's the capital side of things. In terms of the operating budget forecast, that's really based on two major components. We have the township's 2020 operating budget, as well as the Aqua major maintenance forecast that were used as a baseline for developing the operating budget forecast. We are then applying an inflationary adjustment to that forecast as it's prepared on a 10-year basis. And so over the next 20 years, or the next 10 years rather, we're expecting the operating expenditures on the water side to go from about $245,000 in for next year to just under $293,000 by 2030. And then similarly on the wastewater side, the operating expenditures are forecasted to increase from $209,000 in 2021 to just over $250,000 by 2030. Now, the second major component of the operating budget forecast are capital-related expenditures. So in this case, that would be the provision for annual contributions to the capital reserves that's built into that operating budgets and into the rate in that regard. So then before I bring all of this together in terms of the operating and capital and what that means for the rate, I do want to note that we developed three scenarios. Scenario one really being based off of that existing rate structure, which provides, as noted in the introduction, 20 cubic meters of water consumption that is included in the monthly base charge. So we're maintaining that existing rate structure under scenario one, and also moving the township towards the full life cycle cost of capital over the next 10 years, such that by year 10, the rates are fully embracing the full life cycle costs of the capital assets. Under scenario two, we have that same end target, so ensuring that the township's rates achieve that full life cycle funding by year 10, but also proposing to somewhat modify that existing rate structure to reduce that monthly threshold in terms of the consumption that's included in the monthly base charge. And that reduction is proposed to be from the existing 20 cubic meters per month down to 15 cubic meters per month being included in that monthly base charge. And that was done in response to an analysis of how much the average customer really consumes in a month. And that monthly average consumption is around that 15 cubic meters per month mark. And so the way that the rates are structured at the moment, with that amount of consumption that's allowed within the monthly base charge being at 20 cubic meters per month, it means that the vast majority of customers are really on a flat rate system where they're just paying the monthly flat charge and not paying for any of the additional consumption. So we're proposing under scenario two, or assessing what it would mean for the township to reduce that threshold. And then scenario three, finally, both modifies that existing rate structure down to that reduced consumption threshold of 15 cubic meters per month, but also moves towards a modified life cycle funding target. So instead of targeting the full life cycle costing by year 10, it has been designed such that the contributions that are being made to the water and wastewater reserves would allow for the replacement of half of the linear infrastructure by 2034. And really this scenario three and that modified life cycle funding target that underlies this scenario was is being presented for consistency with the rate study that was undertaken in 2015, which was looking at sort of this modified life cycle approach to reduce the rate impacts at that time. So with those three scenarios in mind, this next slide here provides the overall financial forecast for the next 10 years, in this case for water services, and we'll look at wastewater a couple of slides from now. So what this does, you'll see with the orange bars along the bottom, represents the net operating expenditures that have been identified for each year. And it's hard to see here just because of the scale, but they are increasing year over year with those inflationary adjustments that I noted earlier. And then what you see with these relatively small green portion of the bars are the specific capital expenditures that have been identified for each of the years. Really, we only have specific capital needs identified for the next 4 years, as noted earlier. And then later on in the forecast, we are just building up funding to save up money in reserves for future life cycle obligations. Relative to those operating and capital expenditures, the black line indicates the total revenue that we would expect the rates that are forecasted to generate in each year. And what you'll see is that because the projected revenue in each year exceeds the total operating and capital expenditures, there's an accumulation of money that's occurring within the capital reserves, and that's indicated with the purple mountain or area that's behind the bars. So that's again reflective of the fact that the long run life cycle cost of the infrastructure that's in place today exceed those specific capital needs that have been identified for the next 4 years. So what we are doing with the rate design is targeting a level of funding that supports those full life cycle costs, and in this case is allowing for some savings to occur to help pay for those future life cycle replacements and renewals. So this provides the overall financial forecast for water services under scenarios 1 and 2. Because the funding target under scenarios 1 and 2 is the same. It's the same graph, but then on this next one, I will overlay scenario 3. And so here we are targeting a lower amount of capital funding, just enough such that the amount available in the capital reserve fund by 2034 would be sufficient to replace half of the water mains at or around that point in time. So it's a modified life cycle target to that end. And so you'll see indicated with the dotted line below the black revenue line that the total amount of revenue that the water rates developed under scenario 3 would generate would be somewhat lower than under the first 2 scenarios, which is the black line. And then correspondingly, the amount of money that would accumulate within the capital reserve fund would be somewhat lower under scenario 3 relative to the first 2 scenarios, which is the darker purple area at the top. So that's the overall financial forecast for water services. The next illustration here, very similar for wastewater services, illustrating scenarios 1 and 2. So again, we have the operating expenditures, and then on top of that, we have the capital expenditures indicated with the green portion of the bars. Relative to that, we have the revenue that's projected based on the rate forecast that we have developed, and then showing what the reserve fund balance would be or how that would evolve over the 10-year forecast period under these 2 scenarios. So again, there will be some accumulation of money in those capital reserve funds to allow for future life cycle replacements and renewals. And then overlaying on top of that scenario 3, and this is somewhat different from what we looked at on the water side, with there actually being somewhat more reserve fund accumulation under scenario 3 relative to the first 2 scenarios. And as such, you'll see that the revenue line that's associated with scenario 3 is above what we saw with scenarios 1 and 2 in the case of wastewater. So with that financial, or with those financial forecasts in mind, the next section here, we'll talk about the rate projections and the rate projections for the monthly base charges, as well as the volumetric rates. Those are provided in detail within the background report that we prepared. The next few slides here, we will look at what the overall annual bill impact would be on different types of customers under the various scenarios that have been prepared. So looking firstly here at an average residential customer, which based on an analysis of billing data consumes about 180 cubic meters of water annually. And so just to put that itself into context, approximately 3/4 of the township's customers use less than 180 cubic meters of water annually. So with the rate forecast under scenario 1, which maintains the existing rate structure, this customer would see about an 8.4% increase to their annual water and wastewater billing in 2021. And then that would be followed by annual water and wastewater bill increases of approximately 7.7% for the remainder of the forecast period. Under scenario 2, which proposes to reduce the monthly consumption thresholds to 15 cubic meters per month instead of the 20 cubic meters per month currently. This particular customer would see a relatively lower impact to their annual water and wastewater bill. And this is the result of effectively increasing the total amount of billable water consumption, and so shifting some of that cost recovery to the volumetric rates, and thereby recovering more from the customers that are consuming more than that average, or more than the 15 cubic meters monthly. And then finally, under scenario 3, which proposes to both change the rate structure as well as targets the modified life cycle target, the impact would be somewhere between scenarios 1 and 2 in the first year, and then stabilizing around 7% annual increases thereafter. So these again are the impacts on the average or typical residential customer. Here on the next slide, we just see those bill impacts illustrated graphically with scenario 2 represented by the orange line falling between scenarios 1 and 3, as we discussed on the previous slide. So here on slide 14, we have those bill impacts shown for a customer that's consuming approximately 240 cubic meters annually. And the overall bill impact would be very similar under scenario 1 that maintains that existing rate structure. However, when we look at scenario 2 and 3, the impact is higher. And that's because at this level of consumption being 240 cubic meters per month, under the existing rate structure, that customer is not being charged for any volumetric, or is not being charged the volumetric rate because all of their consumption falls within that 20 cubic meters per month threshold. But under the scenario 2 rate structure, which reduces that threshold down to 15 cubic meters per month, there's a certain portion of this customer's consumption that would be charged that volumetric rate. So that bill impact as a result of changing that rate structure somewhat would be an initial increase of about 24% for next year under the scenario 2 relative to what that customer may have been billed in 2020. And then the annual increases thereafter would stabilize again more closer to that 7% mark moving forward. And then very similar under scenario 3, again, for this particular type of customer, there would be that initial adjustment, initial larger impact of about 25%, and then it would stabilize around similar levels as what we looked at for the typical or average residential customer. So again, just showing that graphically on slide 15. I'm going to move forward to slide 16 here. In this case, we have the impacts shown for a large residential customer, which again would be very similar to what we looked at with a medium customer. This is just trying to show you the impacts for a customer that's already consuming beyond that minimum monthly threshold of 20 cubic meters per month. So already under the existing rate structure would be getting charged for a portion of their consumption based on the consumptive rates. So the impacts are very similar to what we looked at for that medium residential customer. And then finally, on slide 18, we have the rate projections or the billing impacts for a hypothetical non-residential customer with a fairly substantial amount of water consumed in a year of just under 1,600 cubic meters for the year. And the impact under any of the scenarios, as you can see at the bottom of the table, would be a decrease in the first year of about 7 to 8%, depending on the scenario, followed by annual increases of around 2.5% to 3% or 3.5% thereafter. The lower impact in this case is due to a rebalancing of the cost recovery from the volumetric rates and the monthly base charges, because a more significant component of this large customers' total bill is related to the volumetric rates. They would actually see somewhat of a decline in their total water wastewater bill for that first year. And again, showing that graphically on slide 19. So in the final portion of the presentation here, this takes the current rates and the proposed 2021 rates for each of the 3 scenarios, and then illustrates the total combined water and wastewater bill for an average residential customer, and then compares that to what the bill would be for that same customer, in this case consuming again over 180 cubic meters annually in a selection of area municipalities. And as you can see with this comparison graph, the range of bills that could potentially be faced by this hypothetical customer ranges widely. As we see from Greater Napanee, that total water wastewater bill based on current rates being somewhere around $750, let's say, to Merrickville Wolford, to that bill being closer to $2,200 or above. And there are a number of factors that contribute to this. Firstly, there's a bit of a pattern here with some of the larger water and wastewater systems in municipalities such as Kingston and Belleville, potentially benefiting from some economies of scale. And then also an important contributing factor is the rate structure that's used in any particular case. So both of those factors impact how much a customer pays for these services. So the township is currently about mid-range relative to these comparators, as indicated with the gray arrow. So that's what the current water and wastewater bill would be for this year based on the rates that are currently in effect. And what is being proposed with scenarios 2 and 3, as well as with 1, would be maintaining that relative position really under any of these scenarios, and especially under scenario 2, which is the recommended option, which I'll get into shortly. So staying relatively close to mid of that range of comparators, or about average. So next we have a very similar comparison for, again, that medium residential customer. I don't think we need to spend much time here. It's a very similar pattern as we saw for the average residential customer. Again, the township currently being about mid-range relative to those comparator municipalities, and with what's being proposed under the recommended option or scenario 2, and that relative position being largely unchanged, just moving slightly towards the upper end of that range. And again, very similar comparison here for that hypothetical large residential customer. And then finally, for that large non-residential customer consuming just under 1,600 cubic meters of water on an annual basis, and that in this case, the total water wastewater bill for 2021 under what's being proposed would be somewhat reduced, but again, maintaining the township's position relative to the comparator municipalities. So having looked at those impacts, we have put forward a number of recommendations within the report. Firstly, that the township adopts full cost recovery rates for water and wastewater services, and ideally embracing the full life cycle costs of infrastructure assets that support these services. We have also recommended that the township considers adoption of the rate forecast provided under scenario 2, which would help the township move towards a closer alignment between the monthly bill that a customer receives and their share of total consumption. So again, it's reducing that monthly threshold down to 15 cubic meters per month. We are also recommending for the township to update the rate study in 5 years. This is generally tends to be the update cycle that municipalities follow, and also aligns well with the requirements for the financial plan to be prepared as part of the license renewal process, which is done every 5 years. However, there are also, as indicated on the slide, a couple of checks, I guess you could call them, that we have recommended the township to consider that would potentially trigger an earlier update to the rate study. And so firstly, we noted some potential data issues with historical meter readings that the township is currently investigating. And once these are resolved, and if the consumption estimates that are seen based on the corrected data turn out to be significantly different from those that were used within this analysis, then it would be a good time to refresh and update the rate study at that time. And then similarly, if future asset management planning efforts identify life cycle costs that are significantly different from what has been estimated at a high level as part of this study, then the capital funding targets and the associated rate forecasts should be revisited. So then, just to summarize on the last slide here, in terms of next steps, we are expecting council to consider approving the rate study and rates pending any feedback that we received this evening. And then finally, once the rate study and new rates are approved by council, we will also prepare the water financial plan, which is required by regulation 45307, which again is one of the requirements for renewing the township's drinking water system license. And that water financial plan really is just a translation of the findings of the rate study into the prescribed format that's required by the regulation. So it will be all the same information, just presented in a slightly different format. So that summarizes the formal part of the presentation. I'm happy to turn it back for any questions and comments there may be.
Okay, Madam Clerk, if you can bring me back to the large view, thank you. Are there any questions for the presenter? So I have Councillor Fodey, I've got Councillor Gorrell, and those are it for now. So, and Councillor or Deputy Mayor Lackey. So go ahead, Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Simcisco. Can you explain to me why you're using a 10-year cycle? It seems to, not seems to, it actually does put a significant financial pressure on the household users. And I'm just wondering why such a short cycle. I'm thinking back to our water tower last year that was redone at, I believe, around $1.3 million, and the first time in 40 years on a complete redo like that. Yet our water and sewer underlie to the properties, other than breakout problems, has not been redone at all since it was installed in '76. And yet you keep referring to a 10-year life cycle. Can you explain that for me, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So the forecast that was developed as part of the rate study spans 10 years. When we're looking at the life cycle of the assets, we're looking at the estimated useful life of those assets. So we're not attempting to save up enough money over a 10-year cycle to replace all of those assets. We are taking into consideration the typical life cycles and recognizing that a lot of the, especially linear infrastructure, tends to be very long-lived. So it's not considering a 10-year life cycle related to all of those assets. The 10-year is just the forecast horizon of the rate study. Does that help answer your question?
It may help answer my question, but it's not going to alleviate the cost to the end user, which I find is at a very alarming increasing rate. I mean, if I was to overlap household income, I doubt I would find them matching any of your graphs of 6, 7, and 8% annually.
So I think that, sorry, Councillor Fodey, did you get the answers to your question? I realized that.
No,
okay.
Okay.
Councillor Gorrell, and then I'll recognize Deputy Mayor Lackey.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, my question really was on the backside of Councillor Fodey's question, the 10-year span, because we're looking at over a doubling in the rates in the community. And just a question which I think, if I dug for it in your long form of this, which we're going to look at later tonight, but did our Lansdowne service area infrastructure assessment done by Lavalin, did it inform in any way the capital side of your projections? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms, I'll start from the back end then. So in terms of the report that was prepared, that was, I made note earlier in the presentation about some of the potential expansion needs that were identified through that report to accommodate future development. So to that end, we have recommended for the township to look into potentially using a mechanism such as development charges to offset some of those expansionary needs. And then in terms of the specific capital that has been included within the rate study at this time, that was informed by a major maintenance and capital forecast that was provided by Aqua. So that's what informed the development of the capital plan. And then again, recognizing that the capital needs that have been identified for the next 4 years tend to be quite a bit lower than what the average annual life cycle need of the assets would seem to be, based on an assessment of the replacement value of those assets and their expected life cycles. We are again trying to ramp up funding to be more closely aligned with that long-term life cycle funding need. Because even though those assets are, some of them, very long-lived, there hasn't been a lot of money put away into reserves to date. And presumably at some point in the future, those assets will require renewal and replacement. So we're trying to make sure that the user fees that are supporting these services can accommodate the replacement and renewal of that capital as it starts to come up later.
Councillor Gorrell, does that answer your question?
I'm not accustomed to being dense, so I'm going to ask a follow-up. So you're asking here, Peter, that the full cost recovery is being done over a 10-year period. Whether or not the capital gets spent, it's going to be in a reserve fund. And if I'm somewhat correct on that, then it seems that 10-year span to be doing that seems a little tough on the ratepayers. I may be out to lunch on this one. If you could help me out with that, thank you.
No, absolutely, and I can appreciate that the increases are not negligible. It is unfortunately something that we're seeing through this work across the province. I think with further asset management planning, a better recognition of the assets that are supporting the provision of these services and their respective life cycle costs, there tend to be pressures on user rates that tend to be beyond just regular inflation. So we are seeing that fairly consistently. When we say that we're moving to that full cost pricing over the next 10 years, that still leaves some, you could say, infrastructure funding gap over the interim period. So we're not proposing to go to full life cycle costing overnight or right into next year. That's where we are proposing to do that over a 10-year lifespan. The township could potentially target a lower amount to bring that annual increase down. It does expose the township, I think, to some risk, so that when those life cycle replacements and renewals do start showing up in later years, if there isn't enough money in those reserves and reserve funds and built into the user fees, then there may be need to have increased external borrowing in those years when those needs come up, or to delay those needs until that money is collected, which again have some risk associated with them potentially.
Sorry, I had muted myself. So I think that addresses your comment, Councillor Gorrell.
Yes, thank you.
This doesn't look good. Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Lackey, you had a comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm a little confused. We've increased the rates for water and sewer, and we had over $1 million in reserve, which we spent to replace the water tower. I guess why are we changing? I mean, we're not going to put up another water tower because the last one we hadn't done in 40 years. And I was told that the piping under the street is poly. And as far as the usage, the bigger the family, the more you're going to use. Well, the bigger the family, the less money you're going to have to pay for that usage. So I don't understand this whole issue at all. People can't afford water and sewer in Lansdowne as it is right now, and it's a deterrent. Everybody thinks people are going to come to Lansdowne because we have water and sewer. Well, they're not going to come to Lansdowne for water and sewer when they have to pay that amount of money. We have to come up with some sort of balance. And I don't think this is it.
So, Deputy Mayor, not to cut you off, but we're going to have fulsome discussion on this, and your comments are definitely warranted and understood. But I think it's more appropriate under our motion, or the motion that will be coming to the table here, and we can debate the validity of putting the rates up as recommended. We have that power to change it, augment it, follow it, not follow it. So perhaps we could go further on your discussion when we get to that point, if you're okay with that.
Very good. Thank you.
Perfect. Any further comment or clarification from the presenter? Councillor Fodey?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Peter. How do you see the next 10 years? Do you see that same graph existing in the format you have on the first 10?
So that's a really good question. It depends on the specific capital needs that may show up in that next 10-year period, right? So if for example, there wasn't the need to undertake any replacements or capital renewals, then potentially some of that reserve fund accumulation would continue to grow until such time as those replacements and renewals started to come up. If, on the other hand, the township starts to see the needs to replace and renew some of the assets, and I know that the comment was made that the water tower was recently replaced or rehabilitated, but there are other assets as well supporting these services. If those needs start to come up, what would happen is some of the reserve fund money that's being accumulated through the next 10 years would be available to offset some of those needs, to prevent large rate spikes being required in those later years to support those replacements. So it really depends on the specific capital needs that may arise in that next 10-year cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or for clarification before we let the presenter go? Seeing none, I'll thank Mr. Simcisco. I really apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. We do appreciate your insight and the information presented to council so that we can make an informed decision on behalf of the taxpayers, specifically in the village of Lansdowne. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Okay, it's been a long meeting already and it's 8:05. I'm sure everybody needs a bit of a relief break, so we'll come back at 8:15 and finish the meeting after that. Thank you. Is that dinner, Deputy Mayor? Ensure. You know, that's what they do for geriatric people, right? Well, it's got all your vitamins and minerals. It's a good thing. Okay, so we need to wrangle Councillor Jameson, Councillor Olkey, and Councillor Gorrell back to the table. I'm meeting my advent calendar. I missed all the weekend ones.
Can I ask you what date you're on?
I was on 4, but now I'm on, I got to catch up. I got a couple here.
I thought it'd be 24.
Yeah, so I was thinking you're into the teens or 20s or something.
No, I've been very well behaved. These are full-size chocolates from Ridgeway.
We can pull around and help you catch up a little.
I wouldn't go that far.
You're doing well if you haven't got ahead of yourself with Ridgeway chocolate.
Mm-hmm. I feel blessed and cursed at the same time. Oh, Planter's peanuts. Or just a can of mixed nuts. That's what we
Are we live?
Not yet. I don't think, Madam Clerk, are we live yet? I can't hear you.
You guys can be heard, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Says we're live.
But we're ready
Okay. Well,
when you're ready.
okay. So we'll reconvene this meeting at 8:16, and I'll just get back to my agenda. Thank you for your patience with the delegations, but I think those delegations were both very important to form our decisions going forward. So I appreciate the discussion. Number 4 on the agenda is staff reports, and the first report is emergency program compliance update. The motion is put forward by Councillor Gorrell, seconded by Councillor Olkey, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that a council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 20-065, being a bylaw to appoint an emergency management program committee, and to bylaw number 20-066, being a bylaw to respecting an emergency management program for the protection of public safety, health, the environment, the critical infrastructure and property, and to promote a disaster resilient community within the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. So discussion on this motion and the report that's been put forward. Does anybody have any questions or queries to the staff in regards to the report? Councillor Maybe?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, in the report, it mentioned about the 2 sites in the event that site 1 goes down, site 2 is ready to go. Do they both have full capabilities on both sides throughout backup generator, telephone, all the communication requirements, and any other hard bits that are required? Are they truly mimicked in both sites? Thank you.
Madam Clerk, did you want to speak to that?
Yep. Are you talking about the primary and secondary shelters or the emergency operations centers? I think you're referring to emergency operations centers.
That is correct.
Yeah, so the phone systems have been tested. There are more capabilities here as far as we have a TV in the room. There's a projector there, so it's a little bit more dated technology, but it is tested each year. That's part of the requirement for compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions in regards to the report? Seeing none, I will call the question on the motion that is on the floor. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. And the next staff report coming forward for Community and Business Services report number CES-028-20. Community grants fall intake, and the motion is put forward by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorrell, that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve a community grant allocation in the amount of $5,859.67 to the Gananoque Curling Club. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Gorrell.
Could we, through you, Your Worship, could we have that fleshed out a little bit? It just seems it appeared from nowhere. And I wonder if our rec
Community and Business Services Director.
Services Director could flesh this out for us a little bit. Thank you.
Ms. Goodman.
Certainly, and through you, Your Worship. This grant was received by myself prior to the deadline for the community fall grant intake, and unfortunately, it did get buried in my email. Owing to their keen eyes, they did point it out. The Gananoque Curling Club has applied for funding to do a few improvements in their facility. They've had the health unit through, and there are a few COVID precautions that they can put into place, including additional water faucets, paper towel, and soap dispensers, for example, plexiglass around the bar, and an additional entrance exit so that they can keep to the ice surface so that they can restrict traffic to a one-way flow. They do have a total project cost of over $8,000, and they are requesting the 75%, which is the allocation or request of $58,5967.
So essentially this grant request was received by the township by the deadline, but it was inadvertently missed in the first intake. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. Does that answer the question, Councillor Gorrell?
In previous years, and maybe we don't have the data, but what type of use do township residents use of the current government? I'm probably sure it's fairly significant, but do we have any data on that? Thank you.
Madam, Ms. Goodman?
Certainly, and through you, Your Worship, my apologies, I was just pulling it up. 63% of their volunteer base and or membership is comprised of municipal township residents.
Okay, good question. Any further questions, Deputy Mayor Lackey?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you again. Not being one of our municipal assets, why are we spending money on private capital? And I know that's going to come up with the arena as well through asset planning and what we're allowed to do. So I'm just curious. Do we give money to other private businesses?
Ms. Goodman?
Through you, Your Worship, the Gananoque Curling Club is in fact a not-for-profit membership-driven organization. We have provided similar funding, for example, to the Lansdowne Agricultural Society to do improvements to their washroom facilities so that they were fully accessible. These kinds of renovations to not-for-profit organizations, especially in a year when they've been significantly impacted by COVID. For example, the Gananoque Curling Club lost $57,000 in revenue this year. What they're endeavoring to do is ensure that there is still a place to safely recreate with appropriate safety precautions put into place, and that they are requesting funding to address those particular things that have been identified by the local health unit.
I think that the Gananoque Canoe Club would fall under that same premise. I believe it's not for profit as well, just as another one that we funded. So, Deputy Mayor Lackey, you would have follow up?
Yes, and I understand that we fund all these things, but I just have a problem funding things that should be funded by Gananoque, not Leeds and Thousand Islands.
Any further questions, Councillor Maybe?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I have participated in actually playing there for many years in the Thousand Island League. So I know that many of our towns of residents do partake in the recreation activity that facility does give us. Also at this point in time, they are one of the facilities that is trying to help feed our residents, whether it be town or township, through their Thursday evening meals. But as much as Councillor Lackey, and I understand your point about it being maybe a private business. I mean, at one time it perhaps was, but I do see it more of an asset to our community in its recreation than anything else. So, yeah, I'm kind of, that's my bit. Thanks.
Any further questions or comments in regards to the report? Madam Clerk, no questions from the public at this point. I don't see anybody's hand up. Oh, I've got a councillor now. Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to clarify in my own head. I did read that the monies for this, there was still room in the previous uptake in the fall to cover that, right?
Ms. Goodman?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, there was a balance of several tens of thousands of dollars in that account, which would, for this request.
Any further questions to the director? Still don't see any hands up from the public. So I will call the question. I'll just read the motion again. Moved by Councillor Oakey, seconded by Councillor Gorrell. The Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve a community grant allocation in the amount of $5,859.67 to the Gananoque Curling Club. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And noted. Thank you. And the motion carries. Next on the docket is the municipal budget. So this is a long one. Everybody strap in. Moved by Councillor Gorrell and seconded by Councillor Oakey that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the 2021 municipal gross operating budget in the amount of $13,799,620 with a levy requirement of $10,519,440 and a property tax rate of 0.00451046. And that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the freezing of council, management, supervisory, and non-union wages for the 2021 year as a one-time exception to bylaw number 344-15 and other human resource policies and practices due to COVID-19. And that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the building department budget in the amount of $383,500 to be self-funded. And that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the 2021 municipal capital budget in the amount of $2,031,000. And that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council defer the Library Board proposed budget of up to an amount of $450,100 until such time as Council can be provided with sufficient detailed budget information to facilitate budget approval. And that should Council decide to lower the levy request based on a reduced approved library budget, the remaining funds will be transferred to a capital fund reserve. Okay, so the motion is on the floor. Discussion? Councillor Oakey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I'm going to have to control myself a bit because I have a certain amount of personal anger over some of this. The library budget. I'm sure Councillor Jameson will back me up on some of this anyway. We'd held some pretty pointed discussions in the library board. And what I thought the direction was that they would look at 2019 actuals and add about 2% for each over that from 2020 and into this year coming. And that would have come to $428,000. And this sum is $22,000 over that with no real explanation of how they came to that I ever saw. There was also the lingering issue of reserve funds, which remain murky as to how they are maintained. So I fully support what's written in the final paragraph of this. And I think more to follow on that. Thank you.
further comments or question in regard to the motion that is on the floor? Deputy Mayor Lackey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I don't mind the capital budget. I realize that we have to go out and do, capture salt and sand, and we need to get some RFPs out there. But as far as the operating budget, I think we have more work to do, and I don't think we did it in 4.5 hours the other day. Be honest with you, I would rather we have another meeting once we've established perhaps what county and school board is up to, so we can better forecast. But no, I think operating is it comes right out of the pockets of the taxpayer. Capital, we can use reserves, we can do some other things, but operating is directly out of the pocket. So I personally think we can do better.
Any further comments, questions? Councillor Mabey and then Councillor
Gorrell. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I also reiterate what Councillor Lackey has mentioned about, for me, having a solid indication from the county and the education of what their intentions are. We can't pass something without that. And I said this last year also, that if they want to take their rate up, and we've already passed this, we're locked in. And I'm not comfortable with that. So I would like to see us defer that. And just as Deputy Mayor said, let's run the capital, let it go, because we need those funds to do what we need to do on a daily basis. But let's hold back and get their information to us so we can make a solid commitment to whatever we're going to do. Thank you.
And I'll recognize Councillor Jameson, or did I? And then Councillor Gorrell. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to ask for a clarification from whichever member of the senior staff can do that. Pursuing the motion as we are seeing it tonight, and if it passed, should the county and the education levy change dramatically, are we truly locked in? Or, I mean, we saw in the middle of COVID, we made changes right up front. We made changes. Now, is there anything from preventing us to return to this? Because I think there's some value in moving ahead, because I know that staff has spent, well, I'm going to say weeks, but really months getting to us to this point. And there's a lot of aspects of this that are coming, unfortunately, in a bad time, but also we're in a position where we're going to learn how to be better managers of the resources we have, as one of our colleagues said at the last meeting. But the question is really procedural. Can we move ahead in order to give staff some direction to get going, or are we locked into it for the balance of the year?
Do you want to take that, Kate, Director Tyndall, or Kim, the deputy clerk? Are you looking to make you can make whatever statement as far as procedure goes. That's fine. Whoever answers.
I was just going to say, through you, Madam Mayor, procedurally, council can always amend their budget. You can adopt it, and then you can always bring back amendments throughout the year. But I think the Director of Finance has some input as well.
Yes.
Go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
I think the challenge would be approving the tax rate, which is specified in the recommendation, because that's what I'm anticipating that council may wish to adjust based on what the other two portions of the tax rate are. And if they come in at an increase, it appears from what I'm hearing that they may not want that tax rate that I've put in this report as a recommendation. So I think, I guess it would be best to wait till we have those other two portions, from what I understand from a couple of the comments.
So I'll throw this out there before I get to Councillor Gorrell's comment. Madam Clerk, we could approve the first and that, the second and that, the third and that, and the fourth and that, but essentially defer the first part of the motion until such time that we can bring forward the county, because that's the tax rate, because the spend in the capital budget does not affect the property tax rate, correct, Madam Treasurer? Or does it?
Through your worship, I guess the only risk again with approving the capital is if council is looking to make a significant change to the operating. As we discussed at the last meeting, there's not a whole lot of room to make adjustments. I mean, we've frozen our own salaries. If council wishes to cut levels of service somewhere, that's obviously up to their choice. But the other area of cutting would be transfers to reserve funds, which could impact the models of the reserve fund amounts and impact the ability to fund those capital projects, depending on how significant the cuts were.
Okay. So the Director of Operations, I believe, is in the room as well. Before I get to Councillor Gorrell, then Councillor Jameson, then Councillor Fodey. As far as the capital budget is concerned, what is a comfortable time frame for you? Because I'm just thinking if we were to defer the whole motion until the January meeting, my hope is that we would definitely, I know last year we received the school board tax indication. I think we looked the other day, Director Tyndall, it was December 23rd.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so hopefully before Christmas, we'll know the definitive on the school board budget. I would also hope that our county counterparts would also have an indication of what they might be putting forward. But to keep in mind, what they put forward and what actually gets approved at county are two different things as well, because we have to go through the budgeting process at county. I'll be honest, I have not received a county budget binder at this point. So there's no indication whether it's flat, whether it's reduced, or whether it's increased. We've heard conjecture about it from different levels, but none of any authority in my opinion. So I understand the hesitancy to approve this, but I don't want to hamstring our Director of Operations getting his tenders out. I know that was one of the benefits of having our tenders out so early last year, as we were able to get the contractors in place quickly. So before I go any further down the deferral path, I'll recognize Councillor Gorrell, Councillor Jameson, and then Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I've spent a good deal of time looking over this, the budget, and had discussions with both the CAO and the Director of Finance. And honestly, this is a bare bones budget at best. We all know what we're staring at down the gun barrel here for this year and for successive years, perhaps. This budget is okay. I do appreciate several council members being hesitant based upon county and educational situation. And I think it would muddy the waters a little bit to have to go back and revisit it. And as the Director of Finance has said, anytime we change a little something, it has an impact on what's going into reserves and so on and so on. I think I don't want to change this budget. If county came in at an increase, I see on page 5 of the budget binder, it takes us from a 3% overall rise to a 3.6. And I think given the year that we are living in, I think that is also reasonable. So I really don't want to change this budget. In terms of when we accept it, I could appreciate and perhaps go for a deferral until New Year, but I do not want this changed. That's my comment. Thank you.
Councillor Jameson, then Councillor Fodey.
Councillor Gorrell's been reading my notes. I agree with you completely. I think this budget should stand as it is. It is bare bones. There's been a tremendous amount of work go into it. I understand that, yes, we might see an increase in the other tiers, but we really don't have a lot of maneuvering room. We've got to do this one way or the other. And when one looks at it from a 3 point to a 3.6, yes, it is money. It's coming out of my pocket
same as everybody else around the table. But I believe we should move forward with it and take it as it comes.
Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with my two previous colleagues' comments. I mean, we've all had this budget before us now for several weeks. Just last week on our budget day, we all pretty much agreed that it was a bare bones budget. It was well done by the staff. Clawed back where they could, where they should. I agree with Councillor Gorrell. Maybe we should not be passing it tonight, but I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Gorrell and Jameson that I don't want to change this budget. In its concept, it's correct, it's accurate. As Councillor Gorrell referred to, with our situation this year, we don't have a lot of choice. Made reference earlier, it was mentioned that we could use monies from reserves. Our Director of Finance, Kate Tyndall, made reference to that. If we recall, that's why the rate went up as high as it did last year, because our reserves had been depleted previously. So the last thing I want to do is dig into reserves. We're just nicely getting them going the right way. And now COVID has flatlined that idea. But I'll leave it at that. I'm wholeheartedly in support of this budget the way it stands, but I will agree in postponing the actual vote till the new year.
Okay, so based on the words or the comments made by council members, the last question I'm going to ask is Director Halliday. Could you speak to the tendering process, whether the budget was passed now or deferred into January, if that's going to make a material change to your getting tenders out, or your tenders basically ready to push out the door the moment that we would potentially approve this budget?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's enough work still to be done in advance of the budget. We're just getting the road needs assessment information back right now, and I think that's a big portion of it. So it'll give us an opportunity to review that, put some projects together, and get it out the door when budget's approved.
Okay, so I'm hearing from staff that pushing this, deferring it to the January meeting is not going to be a hardship from a point of view of having a game plan for roads specifically. As far as tendering. So I will entertain, I'm assuming, Madam Clerk, in order to table this, it needs to be a mover and a seconder to table this motion that's on here until the January meeting.
Yeah. Do you mean the January Committee of the Whole meeting or the January Council meeting? Or until such time as the county and education tax rates are confirmed? We have to identify to what time.
Right. I think we need to do it at Committee of the Whole, mainly because if there needs to be further discussion, there needs to have that sober second thought. And can we table it again if we need to, or is it just a one and done thing?
You can table it again if you want to.
Okay, that's not my goal, but if we need to, I just needed to know procedurally. So can I have a mover and a seconder to table this motion? So Councillor Fodey and then Deputy Mayor Lackey. So Fodey, table, Mayor Lackey. Okay, move, second. And all those in favor of tabling the motion until the January Committee of the Whole, all those in favor? All those opposed? And the motion's carried. So this motion is tabled until January Committee of the Whole. Thank you very much for that discussion. Moving on to the FN 0-030-20 water and wastewater rate study, moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorrell. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the water and wastewater rate study prepared by Watson Associates, and that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve Scenario 2 by modifying current rate structure, 15 cubic meters monthly threshold, and move towards full life cycle funding over 10 years with a monthly water rate of $80.12 and a monthly wastewater rate of $75.38 effective January 1st, 2021. So discussion on this motion. Deputy Mayor. Excuse me.
Thank you, Your Worship. as I said before, people already can't afford the water and sewer rates in Lansdowne. Rather than raising rates, like I said, I'm no engineer, but it seems like we have our ducks in a row. We've done our due diligence as far as raising the rates and putting money into the accounts. So I just can't see raising the rates anymore. As I said, you know, you want to draw people in and you think you're going to do it because you got water and sewer, but if they can't afford it, you know, you've got me personally in my other business. I had one sink and one toilet, and I paid the same as a family, you know, of 6. And I get that this is where they're trying to balance things off, but if you've got a family of 6, you're already, you know, you're feeding those mouths. How do you afford the extra water bill as well as the grocery bill? So I don't know. I think we're tripping over our own feet.
Any further questions, Councillor Fodey? And then Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship. My comments would be similar to Deputy Mayor Lackey's. I find this billing proposal over a 10-year period to be excessive. Having said that, the presentation lay out before us the fact that our township, our village of Lansdowne, lies in the middle of all those rates. So we can say what we want about the rates being high in Lansdowne. They're actually in the center of bigger areas, be it Westport and Prescott or whatever other villages were identified there. So as much as I want to say we're high here in the village, apparently we're not in comparison. The reason we're high is because we don't have enough residents tapping in and utilizing and sharing the cost here in this village. That I will address a little later in the meeting with a notice of motion I have here tonight. But I agree with Deputy Mayor Lackey. I have a real problem with approving this tonight. Maybe we need Councillor Jameson is great at using the term, as you are yourself, Your Worship, with a sober second thought. And I think we need that on this one. It's just a little much, in my opinion. Thanks.
Councillor Jameson.
I certainly hear what my colleagues are saying, Your Worship. I think of it from the perspective of people who are properly maintaining their wells and their septics should be facing comparable increases, particularly based on any capital investment. A new well and a new septic together are going to be pushing $50,000 to $60,000 unless you have to drill deeper. So you capitalize that over 10 or 20 years. It is not out of line with what I'm understanding from this. At the same time, it's an asset. It's an important asset that we have to take care of. And I hate to say this, but I think we're trying to get away from perhaps a reputation of kicking the can down the road with respect to our asset management. And while I appreciate the pressure potentially on many of the residents of Lansdowne, it is there, it is functioning, and they will have to pay for it. And if suddenly something went wrong through a lower rate, they'd end up having to pay on a debenture to repair or replace. So one way or the other, the challenge is in the hands of the people in the village of Lansdowne. One way or the other, it's up to us to manage their risk. And by ensuring that the reserves are stable and increasing, and they are keeping up with the cost of it over time, we're minimizing their risk of having something happen that suddenly we're going back to them and saying we're going to have to do something dramatic. So that's my point of view. I don't live in the ward, but and I have great empathy for the challenge, but I also think it should be thought of in the broader picture of the rest of us having to deal with our other systems as well. Thank you.
Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. In respect to a septic and well, typically their lifespan is 20 to 25 years. So you do have a longer lifespan to actually make it to debenture it, I guess. But in the respect of the actual construction material being used, which is one of my highlights of the wastewater report that I had talked about maybe a couple meetings ago, having had a full site done in the last 3 years to the new standards of the plumbing and infrastructure of water, the piping that was put in certainly has potentially a 100-year lifespan, which isn't much different than what's been put in this village. Yes, maybe it's 40 years old as information has come out, and aggressively 10-year plan to actually have enough money to replace the whole system seems a little aggressive. So if it was put over a 20-year plan, I could see us actually having the ability to maybe be a little kinder to the residents in their pocketbook and make their life a little easier in our community. So I think we do need to look at maybe a fourth scenario. Thank you.
Director Tyndall, you had put your hand up.
Thank you, through your worship. Yeah, if I could just add a few comments. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding with the 10-year forecast that's included in the study. The 10-year forecast showing a snapshot of time, but it's not to say that we are trying to fund the entire system in the next 10 years. The annual capital requirement is based on all of the capital assets that we own for water and sewer. And for each of those assets, over the whole lifespan of each of those assets, how much do we need to set aside each year to have enough money at the end of each respective end of life to replace that asset? So if we have a 10-year asset, we need to put away 1/10 of that value each year. If we have a 50-year asset, and so on. So this forecast of 10 years is showing the next 10 years, but the actual calculations of figuring out how much money we need to put aside is over the life of the assets. So it's up to 50, 60, 70 years, however long those assets are expected to be in service. Unfortunately, we are under a time crunch with this study. We need the related financial plan approved by council for part of our drinking water license requirements. We are behind. We have notified the ministry that we're behind, but the financial plan was due in November. So there is some urgency around approving this report. I understand that the rates, the increases are significant. Unfortunately, for a system of this size, it is very difficult for us to fund the infrastructure requirements that are required. Like a water and sewer system being funded by 300 ratepayers is just, it's very difficult. And we do have to be able to fund the system from the rates. So not to say that we can't use debenture or other means of funding to fund the capital. The way the plan's laid out, I believe they are anticipating using all contributions from the reserve funds. So basically cash, like we're trying to raise enough cash to have in those reserve funds. We could be looking at debt or other means by funding some of that to try to alleviate some of the rate increases in the near term, but it is to be fully recovered through the rates that those users pay for the system that they are using, unfortunately. So I'm not even sure what else. I don't even think we have any other means really to help offset those costs at this point.
Councillor Maybe, then Deputy Mayor Lackey, and then Councillor Gorrell. And then we're going to have to either change the motion as it is or make a decision. We're moving up to 9 o'clock and we have a number of things on the agenda that we need to get to. So
thank you, Worship. And through you. The only other one I wanted to put down was I think our date was to have this increase for January. I would like to see that at least 3 months down the road. I think it's too quick for the residents to actually respond to that if their financial requirements within their household are a little strapped, just coming off of Christmas and everything like that, and COVID and whatever. You know, it's only a month away by the sounds of it. And I know that our neighboring community tried doing something like that, and it wasn't as kindly received. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't understand. We with what we were charging for water and sewer rates, we accumulated quite a reserve fund that funded the tower. We didn't do that overnight, so you know, I'm just wondering. Yeah, we spent quite a bit of it, not all of it. So what? at what rate do we really want to reaccumulate? Do we need to do it that quickly? I don't think so. Because it's just killing people.
Councillor Fodey, did you put your hand up, or was it Councillor Gorrell?
It was me.
I can't. Somebody. Oh, Councillor Jameson and then Councillor Oakey.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, your worship is saying that I just heard him say, okay, so we funded the tower and yada yada, and now we have this. But is it looks to me, I'll express my own ignorance. It looks to me like we must do this in order to fund the asset replacement, repair, and so on. As you are now, as the company is now assessing it, as opposed to what we had to do and how we had to approach things in the past. So then I hear debenture, and I said it first. And it's like one way or the other, these people are going to pay for this. It's going to be a question of how we manage this asset in order to mitigate some problem with the system that we haven't got enough reserves. So the question that Deputy Mayor seems to be asking is, or stating is that we don't need to be this aggressive right now. And I think what I'd like to know is whether we do need to be aggressive or not, as opposed to, is there a less harsh way of going about this? Harsh is the wrong word, but one way or the other, these folks are going to have to pay for it. Now, do we do it? Do we sneak up on an asset failure and then borrow and fix it, and then they pay then? Or do we try to manage on the uphill slope in a way that mitigates the challenge for these folks? I know that was all over the shop, your worship, but it's confusing me too.
I'll take Councillor Oakey's comment and then Councillor Gorrell, but I might ask the Director of Operations and the Treasurer to weigh in, maybe some other possible suggestions on how we might address this going forward. Go ahead, Councillor Oakey.
Thank you, your worship. And I just want clarification from the Treasurer. We're hardwired to this. We don't necessarily have a choice in how we apply these. You were just mentioning if it was a 10-year asset, we had to put by 10%. Is that legislated or is that just a guide? Thank you.
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship, it's not legislated. It's good planning. I mean, if we expect it's 10% a year over the 10 years, and we want to have the money in the bank at the end of the 10 years to pay to replace it, then that's. And then when you look at that, then over the whole scheme of all of the assets we own, I mean, it's a $20 million replacement value basically on the water sewer system. We have just under $1 million in the reserve fund right now. Could we anticipate not needing as much as what the rates that they've proposed? It's a guess, really, right? So, I mean, the better data we have, the better educated guess we can make. We don't have great asset data on our water sewer assets right now, to be honest. It's an area we need to do more work on, as we do with all of our assets. So Director Holiday may have more comment on that part of it, but I think we need to be putting money into reserve funds. The level that we need to be putting in, could we maybe dial that back for this next year and then come back hopefully with a better estimate and a better forecast? That might be a reasonable approach at this point. I understand those increases are significant. Unfortunately, like I said, the data that we have to work with right now is not as good as I would hope that we would be able to use to base that decision on at this point.
Councillor Gorrell.
Thank you. Through you, your worship. This is obviously very confusing to council, and I'm sure many people. Couple of questions. Can we, if I don't suggest that we approve this evening because we simply don't understand it well enough, frankly. But if we were to move that direction, can we revisit this and revise it? Can we look at it in the new year as better data comes in? Are those all possibilities? And if that is the case, then it would seem odd that we would be passing this as written. I think that I like the suggestion that perhaps we be very careful of the increase for this coming year and get a hold of a better data set. I don't know how long that will take, a year, I don't know. And what is it exactly that we have to give to regarding water rates? Is it this 10-year plan out in front, or do they just want it for 1 year? Thank you.
Madam Treasurer, I believe, as you mentioned earlier, that we've been given some grace from the ministry in regards to we're late right now with our filing. It was supposed to be done in November. How much grace did they give us? Do we have to make a decision? Because if you want to table this till next week for council, I believe we could do that. But I believe that it would need to be some sort of decision would be made. It may not be what's recommended here, but maybe that gives us a week to come back with something that might be more palatable to council. Madam Treasurer?
Through your worship, I'm not sure that there's a specific like extension on the water financial plan. We do need the water financial plan for the drinking water license. We've notified the ministry that we are working on it, so they know that we're in progress to provide that plan, but I don't think there's an exact deadline that we have to meet.
Okay, so pushing this to next week, allowing council to gather more data and speak to staff members about this wouldn't be a hardship, because what I'm hearing is that people are uncomfortable with the amount of the increase, and that perhaps we could look at something different, and maybe for a 1-year term before we get better data, meaning that our consumption data has been a bit hit and miss as per the presentation. And I know that now that we have a director of operations who is responsible for overseeing this on a long-term basis, with a keen attention to detail, which I appreciate, will be able to hopefully better inform us at the end of next year so that we could commit to a longer term rate increase if required, if not required. I know that there was meetings already happening with Ontario Clean Water Agency about the assets that we have, but I do understand the hesitation. So I'm willing to take from the floor if somebody wants to defer this till next week to gather further information. So I have Deputy Mayor Lackey and then Councillor Fodey. So move to defer.
Your worship.
Yes, go ahead.
We've had Aqua look after the water and sewer system in Lansdowne for years. I don't know why we couldn't get information from them. They know the system inside and out, because I'll guarantee you. So we've done the standpipe. Wasn't that long ago that we did the pump, the pump house, the chlorinator, and all that kind of stuff. So can we get somebody from Aqua, or should we just go and ask them ourselves?
I might ask the Director of Operations to speak to the most recent meeting with Aqua, and if they would have any further information to shed on the situation or not. I don't want to lead anybody down the garden path, because I know there's been discussions already with Aqua, but if there is more information to come from Aqua that would make this a better understanding for us, Director Holiday might be able to help us.
And I think we have a local person who used to look after our system since it was put in.
Director Holiday.
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, we had a meeting with Aqua last week or the week before. Aqua doesn't provide the financial long-term budgeting. They provide the maintenance of our asset. It's up to the municipality to provide that data. So I think that what Director Tyndall has provided with the information that we do have, I know that we do have some meters that aren't functioning correctly. The asset itself has been taken more as a lump asset and not at the aggregate level. So I think we have some opportunities to gather more data. We have the capability of doing this. It's just we haven't had an opportunity to do that yet. So I think within the next year, that's something that we could certainly we could nail down.
Okay, so I have a motion to defer this till next week by Deputy Mayor Lackey and a seconded by Councillor Fodey. Any further discussion on the deferral until next week's council meeting? If there are further pieces of information that the councillors would like to see prior to that, I would ask you to reach out to the senior management staff so that they can provide that information to further inform the discussion. If perhaps you want to make a suggestion as to changing the rate that the increase is, that's a discussion that can be happening with the treasurer ahead of time. Councillor Gorrell, you had your hand up.
Thank you, through your worship. I'll cede that question time. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion on the deferral? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of deferring the motion until next week's council meeting? Any opposed? Councillor Oakey, Councillor Jameson, noted, and the motion is carried. Okay. Next on the motion next on the docket is planning report number PL-044-20 Rockport Strategic Plan Update and Community Transportation Study, moved by Councillor Oakey and seconded by Councillor Gorrell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council accept the final draft of the Rockport Strategic Plan Update and Community Transportation Strategy, the plan, in quotation marks, as presented, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to initiate discussions with the St. Lawrence Parks Commission and any other regulatory agencies to advance the consideration of the recommendations in the plan, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to proceed with implementation of the plan through the future capital and operating budgets and planning processes as set out in the recommendations of the report. Discussion on the motion. I think it was fairly well laid out in the presentation, but obviously the implementation will be up to us at future budgets while we still sit at this table. But I think the other key to this motion that's on the floor is the St. Lawrence Parks Commission, which are a big part of the recommendations that came forward in the study. Are there any further questions or concerns in regards to the recommendation at hand of the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Okay. Next is planning report number PL-045-20, resignation of committee of adjustment member and request to appoint a new member. Motion is put forward by Councillor Oakey, seconded by Councillor Gorrell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to advertise for a new Committee of Adjustment member to fill the recent position that has been vacated. Discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. And number 5 on the docket is unfinished business. So is there any unfinished business? Madam Clerk.
Did you want to ask the public for any comments on the last?
Thank you.
Procedurally.
Thank you. Are there any comments or queries, requests for further information from the public before we move forward with unfinished business? I've got 3 attendees on the Zoom meeting and nobody's raising their hand. So I will move forward to number 5, which is unfinished business. Any other unfinished business that has not been put on the agenda? Number 6, any other business? Seeing none, notice of motions. We have one for Councillor Gorrell, and the motion is put forward by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Gorrell, whereas council has been contacted by residents with concerns regarding the proposed private helipad to be located on the shoreline of the St. Lawrence River within the municipality of Leeds and the Thousand Islands, and whereas the township has legal opinions supporting Transport Canada as the regulatory authority with sole jurisdiction over location and regulation of aerodromes and heliports to the exclusion of provincial and municipal bodies, and whereas council has significant concerns regarding the proposed helipad to include safety impacts on neighboring residential properties, infringement on the use and enjoyment of recreational potential of the St. Lawrence River in this area, interference with significant species, and whereas the St. Lawrence River and the St. Lawrence National Park are internationally recognized as significant and sustainable natural heritage resources in the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands, and whereas the proposed helipad may have a detrimental impact on the natural environment due to alterations to the property adjacent to provincially significant wetlands, as well as significantly increasing noise pollution. Now be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council direct staff to provide communication to the Honourable Marc Garneau, Minister of Transport, indicating that the Council of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands is opposed to the location of a private helipad facility located in close proximity to residential properties and along the shoreline of the St. Lawrence River. Discussion on the motion as it's presented. Councillor Gorrell, do you want to speak to this before we get any further?
Through you, Your Worship, it covers my thoughts entirely, and I would just join staff in a letter. It's more broad range than one helipad near shoreline. It is actually, this township represents an enormous portion of the Thousand Islands, and therefore all that's associated with it, biosphere, et cetera, et cetera. And I would hope that perhaps we could generalize this and have a little more input as a municipality. I don't know that we need some bylaw that gets so specific, but we need some control of particularly waterfront. If someone owns a larger property and they want to put a heliport, have at it. That's no problem in most people's minds, I would think. It's this concept of being near water, having to clear large areas of trees and whatnot. So I just like it broader than one helipad. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions in regards to the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Gorrell. It's unfathomable that our township has no control of something this significant to so many people. I mean, we can go on and state, you know, the eco environment we have around here and the living standards we have around here, and for someone just to take it upon themselves, and maybe they're not wrong as far as our current laws and bylaws, but the proximity of what's been done so far, in close proximity to water's edge and whatnot, this has to move forward. And I fully support Councillor Gorrell's motion here.
Further discussion on the motion. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Lackey, and then I'll recognize the clerk. Do you have a procedure matter? Go ahead.
No, the director has some input.
Okay, I'll take Deputy Mayor Lackey's comment first, and then I'll go to the director.
It's not really that important. I was just going to say, go plant a provincially significant wetland beside it. That'll put an end to it.
There is one beside it, and it didn't end anything. That's the problem. The director, would you like to speak to this, Director Venditti? I'm assuming.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify that while the motion is specific in referencing the particular situation before us at this point in time, the final paragraph is broader in that it's the township of Leeds and Thousand Islands is opposed to the location of private helipad facilities located in close proximity to residential properties and along the shoreline of the St. Lawrence River. So the final paragraph is broader, just for clarification.
Thank you, Madam Director Venditti. I think, does anybody have any further questions or comments in regards to this? I will just bookend this by saying I can appreciate that people feel that, you know, this is my land, back off. Not to use the words of an MPP who's no longer persona non grata. I can appreciate that landowners want to be able to do with what they will with their property, but knowing the significance of the St. Lawrence River, the Frontenac Arch biosphere, the provincially significant wetlands, and the onerous levels of rigorous process we put people through to build just about anything in this municipality, whether it be on the river or any of the lakes, inland lakes, or the Rideau Canal. It's very unbelievable that we have zero authority in this particular matter. And while I can appreciate that people want to have the ability to zip back and forth to their summer homes, the people who come here for the peace and quiet and the pristine nature of the St. Lawrence and all the other waterways that we have within our municipality come here just for that, the peace and tranquility. And when you have a helicopter hovering over you in a kayak on the St. Lawrence River, that is not peace and tranquility. So that's what I have to say about that. So I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion that's at hand, please signify. All those opposed? And the motion is carried. So the direction is for staff to send this on to the minister. What it will do, if anything, it's not the point. I think we've made our point here at this council table, which is the most important thing that we can do. Any other notices of motion? Councillor Fodey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through accumulation of a number of things that have happened most recently, our water sewer study, if you will, in the village of Lansdowne came to us about a month ago. And there's been a number of contractors, if you will, have come forward. I think some of them were aware of this study, and there's been an increased desire for a number of them to want to build in this village. I would like to make a motion to direct the staff to identify lands within the village of Lansdowne or immediate surrounding area that are now available for new housing construction. I think I find ourselves, with the help of some staff, trying to meet with these people when they come forward, and we don't have a concise answer for them. They come in here and they're ready to build, but we can't point to any one given area and say, there's the property, buy it, build it, or move on. And I think that's just wrong. And our water sewer study presentation here tonight just helps put an exclamation mark on that need. If we can get more houses built in the village of Lansdowne, we have the capacity up to a certain level, obviously, but if we can get more houses in here, that'll help lower these costs on a per household or per user basis. So that's my point in bringing this notice of motion.
Councillor Fodey, can I ask you to work with staff to formulate that notice of motion to be brought forward at the next meeting?
Absolutely, that is my intent to bring it forward at the council meeting.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk.
So you want your notice of motion to be brought to the December 14th council meeting?
If it can be. If it's a time constraint, then, you know, another 3 or 4 weeks isn't going to really curtail the intent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Fodey. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we'll work with the councillor and the staff to organize that. Any other notices of motion? Seeing none, I'll just give a very brief mayor's update. We've seen a number of COVID-friendly, if that is a context, where people are still trying to have things for Christmas holidays. We had Santa Village visit the village of Lansdowne, the tree lighting ceremony in Sealy's Bay. There was the Gananoque Standstill Parade that happened on Saturday night. And I know that the town of Gananoque are having socially distanced Santa photos, and the trees are all lit up in front of this town hall in downtown Gananoque, if you will. And it's quite beautiful at night, and it is very heartening to see the number of people out with their families, socially distanced, wearing masks, but enjoying family time together. And I just wanted to provide my congratulations to all those who have worked very diligently throughout the township and the town of Gananoque to ensure that residents and family members have things to look forward to and things to do despite the limited available resources and limited gathering numbers, that sort of thing. I know this is going to be a very difficult holiday for a number of people, and the people that are trying to do their best to make it better for someone else, I have a lot of time and a lot of respect for. So thank you to all of those who have done that. As far as other announcements, there is a COVID testing clinic happening tomorrow at 1 Jesse Street. You have to apply, you have to go for an appointment. And I know there are a number of other roving testing sites throughout the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. I will be attending County Committee of the Whole tomorrow and County Joint Services also by Zoom on Wednesday morning. And other than that, unless anybody has anything else to remind me of, I did not bring my notes with me for some reason into my office. I think that between now and next Monday, if there's anything else, I'll just add it to my next Monday's update. And with that, any further discussion before I close the meeting? Put the motion on the table, moved by Councillor Gorrell and seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Committee of the Whole adjourns. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Thank you, gentlemen and staff, for making the effort and the blended